the Rugby Paper Podcast final episode of 2023, we're looking back at 2 weekends of Champions Cup action as well as looking forward to Harlequins' big game in a couple of weeks' time against Gloucester. Joining us to do so is someone who has nearly 70 England caps, Harlequins and England's second rower, Joe Launchbury. Before we kick off this episode of the pod, Christmas is coming up, everyone. For any rugby superfan out there, give them the ultimate Christmas present by gifting them an official hospitality experience at Twickenham with Keith Prowse, principal sales partner to England Rugby Hospitality. They've got a place at the stadium called The Gate, and it is incredible. It's a chop house-style restaurant serving some incredible steaks and an all-inclusive bar. But that's not even the best thing, as the premium seats it offers are right on the touchline between the 22s in the East Stand, which in my opinion are the best seats in the stadium. It's an incredible experience, and they now only have packages left for the England-Wales match for next year's Guinness Six Nations. So I suggest you get in touch with our friends at Keith Prowse by visiting their website, keithprowse.co.uk/the Rugby Paper. Welcome back to the Rugby Paper Podcast. Just a brief reminder of the sort of new fortnightly episode schedule until the Six Nations. So if you missed us last week, now you know why. In the time gone by, we've had 2 weekends of Champions Cup action. Today's special guest was a part of both of those weekends, on the right side of one result in a thriller against Racing, and on the wrong side of the other against a Toulouse side that we were just saying off air were very, very impressive. Nearly 70 England caps to his name. Joe Launchbury, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Has the body held up okay after your battle against Emmanuel Mayfu?
Yeah, he's a pretty big guy, probably one of the biggest I've played against, I think. Yeah, been a tough couple of weeks, like you said then. Been a bit of a contrasting fortnight for us. Obviously a great win out in Racing, probably one of the best wins I've been a part of really in my career. And then we knew what a tough ask it would be at the weekend. And to be fair to Toulouse, they played obviously exceptionally well, and they're pretty stacked, aren't they? They've got some amazing players. So we were in the battle for a fair bit, but the last sort of half an hour really probably got away from us.
Do you think that the win against Racing sort of put a target on your back in the eyes of Toulouse?
Potentially, I think they certainly didn't underestimate us. You see quite a few of the French teams travel to England with maybe slightly rotated teams. They certainly didn't. They paid us a fair bit of respect by picking probably the strongest team they could pick, which was, to be fair, exactly what we wanted. It was a great challenge for us as quite a young group to kind of see where we stand against what is, in my mind, probably one of, if not the best, one of the best teams in Europe.
Yeah. You felt that you were playing against one of the best teams in Europe.
Yeah, certainly for parts of it, for sure. Yeah.
do you think, Joe, that the Harlequin style, which you know most rugby people love to bits. I mean, you play a lot of rugby. It's an all-court game. It's high tempo, etc. Does that play into the hands of a team like Toulouse just a little bit? You must have talked a little about that before the before kickoff. That generally when English sides or Irish sides in the Champions Cup have really got hold of Toulouse, they've given them a bit of a battering up front. They've denied them any kind of oxygen. Whereas you lot sort of you love to breathe the air, don't you?
Yeah, we definitely spoke about it a lot in the week. We actually, to be fair, we probably didn't quite execute quite a few of the things that maybe we looked to do in the week, which was probably the most disappointing part. I felt the effort and the sort of the fight was there, but the bits you were talking about there, maybe feeding their energy, we wanted to try and take away from that, like you said, not feed their sort of offloading game, their slightly erratic transition game, and that block I talked about there, you feel like you're playing against one of the best teams, is when every offload seems to stick. You're constantly on the back foot. And it feels like sometimes you're playing against a few extra men, which makes it pretty tough. And so, yeah, we definitely fed that energy. Could have we done a bit more up front? Potentially losing sort of Dino, one of our main lineup options early on, and already we picked quite an attritional back row rather than maybe a bit more of a jumping back row. So then to lose Dino as well was a bit of a loss. So yeah, we probably lost a bit in the line-out, so maybe we couldn't quite get that set piece stranglehold that maybe we wanted.
How is Dino doing?
Yeah, I think he's up and about. Those things, and they're always horrible to see, aren't they? The medical team doing what they need to do and what they're paid to do a great job looking after him. He was in the club today, moving around, going through all the various checks. But yeah, for sure, won't be playing for this game for sure. And yeah, definitely taking it steady.
Good. Well, that is great to hear. I want to come back to Mayfu. just because, well, player of the match, and obviously now soon to be eligible for France, which is a pretty scary prospect. I was actually watching Skulkberger talk about playing opposite Henry Tuolangi, and that's, playing opposite Mayfu obviously rings a similar bell. Were you not afraid, but intimidated standing opposite someone like that?
Well, I thought the screen always added pounds. That's what I've been told. But I watching the clips of him in the week. I knew he was big, but it wasn't until I stood next to him I realised quite how big he was. I got a good friend, my good friend Jack Willis is there, and he's told me a bit about some of the stuff that he gets up to in training and sort of how big he's been for them and been a real big part of their pack. So we certainly didn't underestimate him. But yeah, and the impressive thing with someone like him is he played the 80 minutes, so it was a pretty fast game in parts, really attritional. And I think French rugby, a lot of French players get quite a lot of stick for being massive and maybe only playing sort of 45, 50 minutes. This guy can play. He played the 80-minute shift. He saw it out, and that's something I've always prided myself on. And it looks like something that he's got already in spades, which is great.
Two questions on that, Joe. Did you call him a bag of wind at the first line out, which is what people like you should do with 70 caps? But seriously, there's always a lot been said about French fitness in general, particularly at club level. And there is still an assumption amongst some broadcasters that they're going to blow up at some point in the final quarter. Do you think that's now mythological, or certainly lost in the mists of history?
Yeah, it used to be a narrative we used to say, for sure. We used to talk about sort of the real strength of the French team, the stuff we talked about earlier about sort of not giving them that energy to sort of make their game come alive. And then we used to always kind of feel like if you're, especially when we play for England, if you're in the game at maybe sort of 60 against France, you felt like you were in a real strong position to go on and win the game. We always backed ourselves in that regard. But I don't hear that chatter anymore from like over the last couple of weeks. We certainly weren't saying that as a team. We probably talk more about starting well against these guys now. You got to really, especially away in Racing, we knew the crowd being inside, all those sort of things would feed their energy. They're quite emotional. They can be quite emotional at times, so they play on that emotion really, really well. But for sure, the fitness seems to be. I think that's been the biggest change in French rugby. Without studying it in too much detail, from my view, they've always been exceptionally talented. They've always been able to do all the real sort of intricacies of the game, and also some of the real hard yards as well. But perhaps haven't had the consistency to maybe do it over and over again when they're really, really tired. But now that seems to be a sort of a bit in the past. And yeah, I mean, I look at them now; they seem really, really fit. And like I said, there's guys who don't have to come off at 50; they can play the whole game and really keep that sort of fitness going.
From the Harlequins' perspective now, obviously, where does the sort of Toulouse result? Have you spoken about where that leaves you guys? Obviously, great win against Sale, great win against Racing. How do you stand now following this weekend? Do you think?
Yeah, I feel we're in a pretty strong place, really. We know how quickly these games come over Christmas, and I wasn't here last year, but the boys have talked a bit about this is the period that we probably got wrong last year. Quinn's lost a few games around this Christmas period, and because they're so sort of condensed, bouncing between Europe and Premiership, we drop into the Premiership now for 3 games, and if you don't get it right, 3 games is actually quite a big chunk of the season nowadays. So we have to kind of slot back in really well, and there is a bit of disappointment about last week. But if you take the 2-week block as a whole, we've come away with 5 points in games that probably outside people maybe wouldn't have given us too much of a chance in. So whilst frustrated to not get anything out of the game at the weekend, we probably should have got something out of the game. I don't think we're certainly not disheartened by that. And yeah, the attention goes straight back to a game this weekend against a team who are being talked pretty highly about by journalists, media, and rightly so. Bath have been really strong so far. They've probably been the most improved side in the league, for sure. So yeah, we've got a big challenge to sort of sink our teeth into this weekend.
Yeah, 100%. We'll get to the big game in a little bit. Just while we're on the subject of Racing, obviously one player that's been in the news quite a lot in the past week or so is Henry Arundell, who has made himself ineligible for England duty by signing on for Racing until 2026. Brendan, I'll bring you in. What do you make of that whole situation. It's obviously, the eligibility ruling is something we've spoken about quite a lot. Does this just highlight the need for it to change even more?
Well, yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy for him. I mean, my understanding is that he was given an understanding initially that he could do this and he could be eligible for the Six Nations this season. Well, that's what the RFU said when he did it. I kind of feel they ought to honour that. That was he based his decisions around that. Very difficult circumstances for him when London Irish went pop, and he had to make a decision. So I think he's had the rug pulled under his feet rather horribly there. I've always said that the lads can play where they want. If they want to play in France, they always seem to come back better players. Why shouldn't you play 22 miles over the ditch? I don't get it. I've never got it. But it does seem that they're still going to impose that law with Henry Arundell anyway. I don't think it'll affect his career whatsoever. A year in the T14, he'll get that under the belt. He'll play very well, I'm sure. He'll score great tries. He'll work on his game, and he'll come back a better player. But I don't really understand how they've got to this situation. It shouldn't have happened.
There's massive hypocrisy here, Ollie. I mean, the RFU has a responsibility to make sure that the Premiership is properly administered. 3 clubs go bust. Players are blowing in the wind, wondering where they're going to play, next, not just next season, next week, or whatever. And, then they bring in a law that says, that actually, or reactivate a law that says there's no mitigation at all. You've got to play in the Premiership, otherwise you're out. I think it's nonsense. And I think that it's a double standard as well. I understand, Premiership directors of rugby and, almost certainly Steve Borthwick, although, Borthwick said at the outset that he'd rather see players playing over in France and that they be eligible for England. The real pressure has come on from the Premiership directors of rugby who basically don't want to see guys not in the Premiership. But for me, there's not enough opportunity for young players to come through as it is. There are a huge number of non-eligible overseas players who've got dispensations because they're South Africans or South Americans or Pacific Islanders playing in the Premiership already. And, one of the big difficulties is getting young English players to get game time at the right level.
Joe, can I ask what you think of all of this? Obviously, you mentioned Jack Willis earlier. He's presumably going to be faced with a similar conundrum soon. And I know post-World Cup, he was looking at talks with the RFU for potentially being able to continue that eligibility through the sort of, obviously, WASP's anomaly, so to speak. What do you make of it all?
Yeah, I think obviously Henry's going through it now or just gone through it. And Jack was in an almost identical situation, as were a number of my sort of ex-colleagues and guys from Worcester. We had choices to make, really. Then, do we go overseas and kind of put an end to international aspirations then, or do we stay? And I, at the time, chose to go to Japan. I felt that was the best opportunity for me. And in terms of going abroad and playing abroad, I think I can speak from my experience. It's something I would never have done, but I'm so grateful that I got to do it and absolutely love my experience. I did it at a slightly different, obviously, stage of my career to Henry, but Henry hasn't just gone like I did to Japan. He's gone to an extremely elite team in France, coached by a great coach, one of the best coaches I've been coached by. So yeah, Henry's going to come back a better player, 100%. The rule around it, yeah, I mean it's tough, isn't it? It's a rule it's almost they're at the point now where if they changed it, it would almost they've gone so far down one road with it, and there's been a lot of players who have taken contracts in England in order to carry on with their international career, and I'm sure a whole bunch of them would be aggrieved with the idea that they've done it and then someone else thought so. But I guess at some point they have to put the line in the sand and say this is what we want to do moving forward. I can see why young guys want to go and try their hand in the French league. It's every weekend seems to be a huge competition and a huge challenge, and obviously the easy throwaway comment is to say you're going for money, and I'm sure that is some people's sort of motivation, but I also think it's a fantastic league to go and sort of learn about yourself and also improve as a player.
Interested by the sort of framing of, obviously some people stayed in the UK or stayed in England rather to hold on to their international aspirations, and obviously Jack Willis went to France, kept playing for England. Henry Arundell obviously has gone to Racing, initially eligible for England, now no longer is. What do you make of the sort of, do you think that those decisions were made with the expectation almost, or the hope that the RFU would change it, at least so that if your move was enforced by obviously the really sad events of last year with 3 clubs going into administration, that loophole would still be enforced however long you want to play there? Because obviously you move country, you move to a new club, it's destabilizing. You've done it twice in the last year.
Yeah, maybe I can't speak for every individual case, but I think Nick's point's the point really is, obviously it doesn't take you don't need to look too deep into it to realize that the finances in the English game are different, and clubs aren't in positions to just be offering contracts left, right, and centre. Obviously, I've been through that experience myself, and I'm extremely thankful for the chance to stay in England myself. But that was a family decision to stay in England. We were desperate to stay in England, and coupled with the fact that I got a chance to come to a great club at Harlequins, I feel very extremely fortunate. But a lot of guys didn't get the opportunity, and someone like Jack didn't get a huge amount of opportunities in England to continue to play rugby here. So then what's he faced with? He's faced with potentially an opportunity in England, or he's faced with the idea of going to, like I said earlier, a huge club in Europe. And from a rugby point of view, it seems like a no-brainer. But he is passionate about playing for England and desperate to play for England. And I think he's proved that in the way he's played. And is Henry in the same boat? I don't know. I don't know if Henry had offers in England or not. But I guess it's not quite as simple as just saying they didn't want to stay in England. Sometimes it's sort of comparing 2 different things really, and getting a contract sort of late notice, last minute, especially if you're a player of England's aspirations. It's extremely hard to fit yourself into a cap, which is the maths don't really work on anyway.
And there's another way of looking at this. Henry Arundell's one of the hottest properties in the world. If he comes back, he won't be on a bog standard salary. If he gets his market value salary, that's money that would probably employ 2 or 3, maybe 4 players in that club on average on their normal salaries. So to bring him back, you have to make a big disruption to the club he's going to. Plus, he was already promised he could have that this season in the top 14 when he made his informed decision to go to Paris. So I think that, the RFU's behaviour of this has been very poor.
Haven't they just dug themselves into a bigger hole? I mean, you referred to your time back leading into 2015 under Stuart Lancaster. I mean, this kind of thing was in place then, but there was Stuart always spoke about unless exceptional circumstances occur. And the RFU never actually defined what the exceptional circumstances were, which is quite clever, unusually clever for the RFU, I would argue. And it obviously meant that if somebody was absolutely, if there was a rash of injuries in the same position, obviously that's an exceptional circumstance. But it was also completely clear that if someone was totally playing the house town in France and was self-evidently a key member of the side, or would be a key member of the side, then allowances would be made. So there doesn't seem to be that kind of flexibility at work now with the RFU, which is a little bit odd. And they find themselves flying in the face of pretty much everything that's going on everywhere else in the world. I mean, we know New Zealand don't pick from outside of New Zealand, but crikey, they don't have to make some compromises in shipping players out on sabbaticals and letting them go to France for a chunk of time. As long as they're around for a World Cup selection, then that's fine. And I would have thought it's not beyond the wit of man to make sure that any English player playing in France, as long as they're available pretty much contractually for when they're needed, or the lion's share of when they're needed, I really don't see an objection to people playing abroad. It broadens their horizons. It makes better players of them, generally speaking. Even James Haskell came back a better player. Even James came back a better player from his travels.
But there's also, there's another, just a logistical factor here, and that is that all this stuff about, a mass exodus of English players going across to France, it's completely scotched by the French regulations, the GIF regulations, which stipulate, I think this season it's got to be, I think it's 75% or more of players in those top 14 squads have got to be French qualified.
Yeah.
Would it be the same in the Premiership? I mean, the Premiership seemed to, some of the Premiership owners seem to want to have their cake and eat it all the time. They want to stop players going to Europe, and yet they stack Premiership squads with people who are not, non-English qualified.
The days have gone, Nick, haven't they? When the French couldn't find a tight end because they were all Georgians, and they couldn't find a wing because they were all Fijians. Those days have gone. As you say, the GIF regulations are far tighter over there now, and they're awash with players. They have as many players as they need, and probably more than they can use.
And English players have got to compete against players from all over the world for those contracts.
Which is good for them.
Not simple.
Which is good for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the odds of Henry Arundell playing for France in 4 years' time?
That's a bit mischievous.
Yeah.
Well, World Rugby are capable of anything, as we know.
It's a hand grenade that landed in the middle of the channel, Ollie.
Right. I want to preview the big game very, very quickly, Joe. I'm not sure you know about this, actually, because you weren't in contact with me before the podcast. You were in contact with Nick Powell. But we do a little random Rugby 15 section, which is just 15 quick-fire questions about you and your career, if that works with you. And then we'll preview the big game.
No problem.
Cool. Awesome. Nickname?
Launchers.
Best rugby memory?
England first cap.
Most embarrassing rugby memory?
Don't know, actually. Luckily not too. I dropped the ball over the line. One of my first games at Wasp early on. Nothing too crazy, luckily. Pre-game tune. I don't listen. That's one thing. I don't ever have headphones on before the game. So whatever's in the change room, I like to listen to the crowd when I'm walking in and stuff.
Post-game meal?
Pizza.
Nice. Best player you've played against?
Against, I always say Paul O'Connell for that. Just sort of someone I played, always watched growing up, and the chance to play against him. And I remember he held me back for a try under the post, and I still can't forget it now. But those sort of dark arts, unseen stuff, he was a master at it.
Best player you've played with?
George Smith, probably.
Favorite player right now?
Favorite player right now? Fresh in the mind from the weekend. DuPont's not bad, is
he? Rugby-eyed. Do you think he'll succeed in sevens?
Oh, I think he can succeed in whatever he wants. If he wanted to, with a balance on it, be whether he can bounce between the two. But I know he's so passionate about winning the league and in Europe this year with Toulouse. So it's whether he'll be able to do it all. But
yeah,
I can see it. I can see him being quite handy at sevens. Yeah.
Rugby idol.
Probably someone from the 03 gangs. Probably someone like Martin Johnson.
Favorite stadium?
My favorite stadium, always say atmosphere. Olimpico in Italy. I like playing there, and fortunately we usually win there as well. So normally quite good all round.
When's the last time you went there?
When did I last go? 2022 maybe.
Okay,
2021.
So yeah. Favorite gym exercise?
None. That's cool. That's what's going to retire me. I love the rugby. I still love playing and training, but the gyms has never been for me. Yeah.
So once you hang out the boots, you're not setting foot in
well, I feel like I might. I enjoy it in the off season, so I feel like maybe more. But when the body's so sore, it's kind of doing what you can to get through to the weekend.
Yeah, very fair. Occupation if rugby didn't exist?
It would be in sport, some sort of coach or another sport or something. Definitely in sport.
That's what we had. Caden Murley on. He said PE teacher.
Yeah, we something like that.
Yeah, all of the Harlequins boys are just going to end up being PE teachers after that.
You could be a stockbroker now. You're a Harlequin, of course, Joe.
Yeah, true.
Superstitions?
None.
Rugby law you would change?
God, a lot. Probably like keep it forward orientated. Probably something to do with like just walking at the side of a mall, I think, like people do now.
Yeah, nice. And lastly, best thing about working in rugby?
There's so many, but just as simple as being around sort of 40 like-minded, similar age people. Yeah, go to work every day and have a laugh, even after a loss. It's the best job in the world. Very fortunate.
Awesome stuff. I'm going to throw in a very, very cheeky question, which, depending on how you take it, I might cut from the edit. But back in 2015, when you got made man of the match, after the Australia thing.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah. Can I just ask about it? Obviously, if you don't want to talk about it, I totally get that.
I'm not as embarrassed by it as everyone else thinks I should be by it. But
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just showed up, took the medal or whatever it was, and walked off.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't award it, and my dad didn't award it to me, so it was. That was a really tough tournament. It was kind of. I mean, it was a long time ago, but it still sits pretty firm in the memory. And I think those days are good. They're a good driver. It's a good reason why I was so passionate to kick on and carry on playing for England, because it was something that didn't sit well with any of us. I said earlier, Stuart was a great coach, and Stuart is, and he's proven what a great coach he was. And if you'd asked us 2 weeks before that tournament, were we ready for it? We were, but we had an extremely tough group. Someone out of us, Wales and Australia, were going to go home pretty upset, and unfortunately, it was us. I'd done a neck operation a few months before, and I was sort of fighting back to get back into the World Cup squad and played a bit. And then obviously, I was actually really proud of how I came back and then contributed and felt I did play well. But you're in that horrible circumstance of getting knocked out of the home World Cup. You're in the changing room after, and someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "You've won man of the match." And I literally thought it was the most ridiculous thing ever. And I had a quick conversation with the media guy saying, "Please don't make me go out for the picture," because I had to go back out the changing room for the picture. And obviously, with all these things, you're contractually obliged to do all this sort of stuff. And yeah, I think I wanted to be anywhere but there at the time. But yeah, it was one of those days.
No, but well, like you say, you're seemingly not as embarrassed about it as everyone thought you were. The reason I asked is obviously when I asked most embarrassing rugby memory, there was a voice in the back of my head wondering whether you would say that.
Was that? Yeah, it was embarrassing in terms of losing out to a home World Cup.
Yeah,
but
fine.
Yeah.
No, fair play for handling it like that, because like you say, it was framed a certain way and not necessarily particularly well handled. But no, thank you for answering my curiosity.
Is it actually, Joe? It was probably a good interview to miss, because I did remark about it in the Rugby Paper a couple of weeks ago. But your great predecessor Simon Shaw was in exactly the same situation.
Yeah,
after the second Lions test in 2009.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did have a game that day. I think
he probably played a bit better than I did that day, I think.
He did have a game, but the interview afterwards, it was sympathetically done by Graham Simmons, but he found it really hard, Simon. I mean, the old.
I think it just shows that no one, you'd rather play rubbish and win every day of the week, and I genuinely mean that. Like, you want to do your best for the team, and obviously you want to play well, and you're so desperate to play every week, but I play a team sport. I probably wasn't good enough to play an individual sport, but everything about a team sport I love, and I'm so desperate for my kids to play a team sport. I don't care whether it's rugby or what, but it's those bits that you learn, and those bits that I think what makes our game so great are those bits. And yeah, I'd happily never win a man of the match and win a few games, and it'd be the other way around.
Good answer.
Very well put. How old are your kids, out of interest?
9, 3, and 8 months. So that's why I'm busy, but all good.
The 9-year-old as tall as you?
She's on her way. Yeah, she's going to be tall. Yeah. So, but yeah, maybe the two lads might play rugby. I don't know. Like I said, it's a great sport, but I'll try not to be the pushy dad and push them into it. See what comes. My wife's not very sporty, so maybe they might follow her into something a bit different.
Awesome. Not PE teaching either, then.
Exactly. They can dream higher, maybe.
Right. Last little 10 minutes or so. Let's look ahead to that big game. Obviously, Twickenham Stadium, doubleheader, Harlequins versus Gloucester, and Harlequins women versus Gloucester Hartbury on December 30th. Tickets are still available, by the way, £35 for adults and £25 for under 18. So go to eticketing.co.uk/Harlequins to get yours. Joe, how are you feeling? It's obviously your first one. What have you ever played in one against Quins before?
Wasp did play one a few years ago, but I was unfortunately injured. So no, I've never, like you said, it will be my complete first experience of a big game. I think it's great, really. I think it's kind of, I think Quins have probably been the market leaders really in doing this. It's obviously the 15th anniversary of it now. So they've been doing it for a long, long time. And for a lot of players who maybe play week in, week out in the Premiership, but never quite go on and reach international level, this is by far and away the biggest sort of chance of playing a massive crowd that these guys get. So it's something that we don't take lightly. It's something I know that everyone gets really, really excited about. I think there are over 70,000 now seats. So by the time the game comes around, it's probably going to be, you'll probably look to the eye pretty much sold out, even if it's going to be there or thereabouts. So yeah, it's a great, it's great for the club, obviously financially great for the club, but more importantly, it comes at a good time for us and a nice bit of buzz around Christmas to have a pretty cool game to look forward to.
It is that big, but I think it's the biggest annual club match in the world, or that's certainly how it's billed. You get a nice, unique kit for it. Obviously, Twickenham absolutely packed out, like you say. You mentioned just on the rugby front, you mentioned that last year the chat in the squad is that you didn't get that sort of bit of the season right. Just talk about why around end of December time, January, obviously Quins didn't, would have liked to have made playoffs last year and they didn't. Why it's such a pivotal point in the season? Yeah,
firstly, the games are so tight at the moment. It is literally, it can sometimes be you can play well but not quite get the result. I feel from coming in myself and a few other players and Danny Wilson, the coach, should just try to build a bit more consistency within the group. Try and take the result out of it. Can we be consistent in our performance week in, week out? Try and not just look at purely results. Can we play the way we want to play and be consistent week in, week out? And that's the challenge in itself. I also think it's potentially an easy excuse, but as you talked about right at the start of the show, Quinn traditionally like firm tracks, like a bit of sunshine to play maybe that real style. The English season kind of split into three, really. It kind of starts pretty decent weather, and then these sort of 3 months in the middle now, especially some of the pitches in the league, are pretty hard to play that sort of style in, which can be really wet, and then obviously it clears up again back towards the end of the season. So we've tried to build a bit of a game this year, which allows us to be sort of a bit more, be able to play to whatever we need to win at the weekend. So yes, we still have a DNA of wanting to attack and score tries, but hopefully we've also got a set piece which can live with some of the teams in the league as well, and our defence needs to continue to improve, but I feel like it is on an upward path. So yeah, those are bits really. As for the ins and outs of why the game's got away, maybe not too sure, but yeah, this is like I said, it's a huge block of the season really.
That's very interesting because obviously you mentioned the Quins blueprint and how it's typically running rugby. And obviously against Racing, it was seen that Marcus Smith was obviously front and centre of that very, very great win. How do you think, I know you've not been a teammate of his for too long, but how do you think he's remodelling his game to be able to play by the blueprint that is more suitable for those conditions where, like you say, it's not necessarily the flat track with dry grass and sunny weather?
Yeah, it's one of the things I was personally excited about coming to Quins for, a whole host of reasons, but one of them was the chance to play with Marcus, being in and out of some England teams with him, so knew him personally, knew how good he was, but I guess I've kind of grown up playing with sort of Fordy and Faz really, and what they're all about. So for me to have the chance to come and see Marcus play, try and help him if I can in any sort of way, but fundamentally just sort of see how he operates week in, week out. And yeah, I've been really, really impressed with him. Obviously, exceptionally talented. I think you see how he was against Racing, that sort of indoor firm track. I don't know if you want many other 10 sort of steering you around the pitch. But yeah, he's going to continue to improve for sure. So yeah, no, really enjoying sort of playing with him, seeing how he sort of prepares in the week and how he leads the team. He's obviously still a young guy, but sort of the control he has over the players here is great to see.
Can I ask you one thing, Joe? It's not on Marcus Smith or any individual, but you mentioned earlier that generally speaking, Premiership games are pretty tight. I mean, a hell of a lot seem to go down to the last 5, 6, 7 minutes. With the laws as they are, and the way referees tend to approach those very closing stages, how do sort of experienced players like you try to ensure that you're not left just waiting for the opposition to make a mistake so that the game ends? Because the risks of you going for turnovers and getting pinged and ended up 5 minutes from your own line, 5 meters from your own line, they're just very, very high. It just seems to me that teams have to defend completely differently in the last 5 minutes as they do at any other point in the game. How do you begin to approach it if you're not in possession?
Yeah, it's a hard point, really, and like you said, you do see the nerves sort of come in those last bits as well. For me, what I think is massively important in that time, and it's easier said than done, is territory, and that's why I feel I understand it, but I sense supporters' frustration late in the game when you're still trying to really, really fight hard for territory. Maybe see a little bit more kicking, and I understand that can sometimes be. You can see that as a negative, but if you give away a penalty on the halfway line, you're immediately going to get kicked into the corner. You're immediately under the pressure just builds there, and you're pressure on pressure on pressure. So where if you're deep in their half, it's obviously a hell of a bigger ask, and you sense there's a lot more comfort. But yes, discipline goes. I mean, the stats of discipline are crazy. It's pretty. It sounds pretty obvious, but if you give away more penalties than the other team, you normally end up losing. It's kind of as simple as that, really. So sort of working with the ref, understanding what the ref's giving. Every ref has penalties that they prefer. Some favour the attacking side, some favour the defensive side. So understanding that a little bit, we've got some guys who are unbelievable at Jacqueline. Guys like Will Evans are league leaders really in that side of the game. But have it with that, you're constantly on that tightrope really of giving away penalties. But it's a way that we like to play and keep pushing the envelope, so to speak, at Quins.
There was one killer turnover in the World Cup, wasn't there? Sam Whitelock in the New Zealand-Ireland game after that last 38, 39 phases, was it, chaps? I mean, it was a huge, long attack. And you just wondered whether...
That's the thing. If you don't have Jacqueline in your team and you don't have that sort of guy, teams now can be so competent with ball in hand. You're waiting a long time for a knock-on. You can have the ball. Teams can have the ball for a long, long time, and at times you've got to exert you can have all the best systems in the world defensively, but if you're slowly getting marched back a meter here and there over time, that pressure's going to creep up. So yeah, it is a fine balance for sure. And yeah, we've certainly got it wrong at games at the end. We've made poor mistakes and sort of given pressure right back onto them, but I'd like to think more often than not we get it right.
Just in terms of the opposition, Gloucester, they're obviously not where they'd want to be in the table. I think they're just above Newcastle. But you also mentioned that in the Premiership at the moment, we spoke about Newcastle being an exception to this, but you've got 9 really closely packed teams in terms of ability. So presumably you're not seeing Gloucester's placing in the league as any sort of indication of how close the game's going to be.
No, Gloucester beat us week 1, so we away at King's Home, always a hard place to go. But yeah, we I mean, it's a crazy old game. We thought we'd won it at the end with 5 points, and it got pulled back for TMO and we ended up losing. So it was a crazy old finish. But yeah, so we lost that week 1. So for sure, not underestimating them. They're like you said, then they're as good a team as anyone else in the league. Really, a high quality team. So yeah, and I feel they play a potentially similar sort of style to us at times. Can be really exciting to watch. So yeah, be a hopefully a dry day and hopefully load of good rugby to watch.
You'd have played a few games with George Skivington, Joe, wouldn't you?
I just missed George.
Did you?
Only just so. But yeah, I know. I think I played against him when he went to Leicester, but he'd already gone to Not quite that old. Nearly. I look nearly, but not quite.
Oh, sorry, you're still under 40.
Just about.
Right, well, go. Tickets are still available. Like I say, December 30th, and you obviously get the double header of the Gloucester Harlequins women versus Gloucester Hartpury as well. So do go and grab your tickets. Joe, I can see it's getting dark where you are, so I'll let you get on the road from wherever you're parked. But go well this weekend and go well at Twickenham on the 30th. And thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Cheers. Thanks for that, guys.
Cheers,
Good to see you,
Joe.
Joe.
Well.
After a dramatic Rugby World Cup, all eyes are now on the Guinness Six Nations. Make it a special day with friends, family, teammates, colleagues, or clients by booking an exceptional official hospitality experience with our friends at Keith Prowse, principal sales partner to England Rugby Hospitality. Their match day experience in the gate really has to be seen to be believed, so book your experience now and make memories that'll last a lifetime. Visit keithprowse.co.uk/the Rugby Paper now. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.